Hi everybody, Kyle here. I am going to review the new Netflix series The Sandman, based on Neil Gaiman's classic comic series. I have known about The Sandman and its lore for many, many years. I can't quite recall when I first found out about it, but it's one of those comics that people always gush about, saying that this is one of the best graphic novels, best comics in fiction. So I remember, I think a number of years or so ago, I actually started reading it and I thought it was pretty good. And most recently, before this show came on, I decided to dive a little bit deeper, and I read about 15 or so of the issues. And it's a pretty good series. I'm not as enamored with the Sandman series as some other people are, because some other people call it like the greatest comic series of all time. I'm not really like that. I still prefer things like Watchmen, even like the Dark Knight Returns and Kingdom Come. But I think the Sandman comics are pretty good, and I was really looking forward to seeing how this series would turn out, because the Sandman in general has been a property and IP that they've been trying to adapt for many, many years. And I have to say, this series on Netflix is probably one of the best comic book adaptations that has been made so far, both movie and television wise, because there are many, many things here that are adapted so beautifully. Characters from the comic are brought into live action in such honor, and really just, it's unbelievable how they were able to take some characters from the page and translate them into live action. Not all the characters look exactly like they do in the comics. For instance, John Dee, who is in the comics, he's kind of like this ghoulish looking guy. He looks like he's like almost a decaying body. In the show, John Dee is just human looking. You could say that it looks a bit cheap because they didn't do the decaying body version of him, but they do have like the unkempt hairstyle that he has in the comic. And I think what they decided to do in regards to that character is that they decided to not make him look too cartoonish, because I feel like that may have detracted from the story they were trying to tell. Morpheus, the main character, Dream, King of Dreams, Prince of Stories, the vast number of names he has, the Sandman, which is his name that the show is called. He is a character that when they adapted him, he also doesn't quite look like he does in the comic. He doesn't have the pale skin complexion. He doesn't have the long hair. But once again, I think they did it in a way to make it look not just more realistic, but not as distracting, because some of those things may have been distracting to watch. They do have some other characters in here that I think they, in terms of adaptation wise, they did an incredible job with. One of them is Desire, played by this non-binary actor who showed up in Cowboy Bebop, which is one of the worst shows I've seen, even though I did like I wouldn't say the majority, but the first half of Cowboy Bebop. The last episode completely ruined it for me, because it really had some anticlimactic and out of nowhere twists. But that being said, this actor was in Cowboy Bebop, and I felt bad that they had got such a big role and such a big show, and yet their character wasn't given much to do in that show anyway. So they are in this show, And I have to say, they're not given as much to do in this show, but what they are given is a lot of great material. And Desire, like, they were perfectly cast for the role. Because in the comics, Desire's, I want to say they're non-binary in the comic. And they, from the look, there's this one like cat-like outfit they're wearing at the end of one of these episodes that's straight out of the comic. From the decor of their realm, it is red. There's also Despair, who plays off of Desire pretty well. Again, very limited role. Like, Desire and Despair, they're not in much of it. In fact, Despair's in like 3 minutes of the show. But once again, it shows you how well they adapted it, because what really is at the center of this show is the structure that is adapted from the comics, which is, at first, every episode is like a comic book issue. So the first issue of the Sandman comics is the first issue, is the first episode of the show. And then they have the second issue, second episode, third issue, third episode. But they decide to combine some issues together, and it works. I think that the Corinthian in this story is wonderfully portrayed by this great actor known as Boyd Holbrook, who I've been a fan of since I saw him in Logan. And he's devilishly evil as the Corinthian, and yet charming and suave, like I think the Corinthian is kind of supposed to be. But the way that Boyd plays it, it's just so good. I mean, other characters. Jenna Coleman is amazing as Constantine, or they call her Constantine. I don't know if that was intentional or what, but I call her Constantine, and she's amazing. And I didn't know what they were doing by making her Joanna Constantine instead of John Constantine. But according to Neil Gaiman, they did it because she has an ancestor, Joanna Constantine, and they thought it would work best if they had her play both roles. So that was cool. But I mean, I think Jenna Coleman did a fantastic job, and she really played Constantine perfectly. I mean, there's so many actors, so many stories in this show. But if I want to say some of my favorites, one of my favorite episodes was the diner episode, and that's called 24/7, and it's based on one issue in the comic that deals with John Dee, one of the villain characters, kind of mind controlling people and letting them let out their truths. And it gets into this crazy diner sequence, and it's really a self-contained episode, and Sandman doesn't appear till the very end. And I think it was beautifully shot, beautifully written. It was a fantastic episode. The episode that followed that was the Death episode, which also was outstanding. It's one of the best Sandman comics. And also, in that episode, they had this one thing. It was another issue that had to deal with this guy that continues to live throughout the hundreds and hundreds of years. And thanks to Sandman, like, he talks to him every 100 years. And it's this very interesting play upon what does death mean, what does immortality mean, what's sacred, what isn't. I think that was one of my favorite parts of the show, too. I think that they did a great job showing you the meaning of death, the meaning of humanity and mortality. And I think that also affect Morpheus. And I gotta say, Tom Sturridge in this show, perfect. He is an incredible actor. His voice, the way he talks about dreams and the dreams of our souls and all those dreams, it's just perfect. I just love the way he speaks. I love the way he acts. Perfect Morpheus, perfect Sandman. Halfway in the season, they start to change it up a bit and focus on Rose Walker, who's a character that shows up in later issues of the Sandman. And they do an incredible job adapting this story. Like, some of these lines, some of these shots in the show are straight out of the comics. And I think it was a well-done arc. The arc is known as the Doll's House arc, and it is beautifully adapted. I think if I had any criticisms with this show, I think that it's funny because the structure of this show somewhat reminds me of The Witcher season 1. And I was very disappointed with The Witcher season 1. I think that it works better here because I think the way that you can interpret it, like every issue of the Sandman is almost like you're going through your own dream, and you don't really know how you got to a dream. You don't know when the dream started. You don't remember, how you got there. And I think it's because of that some of the structure of this season feels very what kind of serialized. It's almost like all the episodes don't necessarily connect to each other, where there's this one through line through the season. It's like sometimes there's an episode that just references another episode, but it doesn't necessarily fully connect. And that is a good and bad thing. The good thing is you can watch these episodes kind of out of order. You don't have to, watch it in order. On a rewatch, though, I should say, because you do have to watch it in order, because there is a storyline that starts off in the beginning that affects the rest of the season. But, like, if I'm going to rewatch this show, I can just watch, like, episode 4 again, because it's not like I have to watch the next episode to see the continuation of that. It isn't until the last, 4 episodes that there is, a arc, and that is, one long, almost mini-series there. So there is more of a, I don't know what the term is, non-serialized format of storytelling near the end of this season, but it's not in the beginning. And I think that is, as I said, both a good thing and a bad thing. And I can definitely see some people being turned off, especially those who haven't read the comics, because the comics are very much like this. I remember I was reading one of the Sandman comics that dealt with the guy that he met over 1,000 years. And I'm like, how does this, tie in to the other storylines? And as you learn when you're reading these Sandman comics, it's really kind of just issue by issue a different story. So in the case of this one, this season also followed that. But overall, I think all the actors were great. I think that the special effects were fantastic. I thought that it was really cool seeing how the dreaming works, this new mythology and lore being brought to us in live action. And I think it really honors the fantasy fairy tale elements of the comics. I am very intrigued to see where they would go in the second season and the other seasons, because there's many Sandman comics that they can pull from. And I hope that this does well, and I hope that we get more seasons, and I hope it becomes a hit series on Netflix, because it is one of the best adapted storylines that we've seen from comic books into live action. And I think at the center of this, though, is Tom Sturridge as Morpheus, because he centers this storyline, and he really makes you connected to Morpheus as a character. 2 more notes before I end this. I think that Gwendolyn Christie was perfect as Lucifer. She was just incredible. And the second point is there's a storyline with Lyta, this character that you meet later in the season, and she's like the guardian of Rose and her baby. And I don't know what is with this storyline, but it was so captivating. And it's, from what I remember, it was not in the comics. It wasn't touched upon like it was touched upon here. And that goes into just the whole idea of this show. Sometimes there are moments where it improves upon what the comics gave us. There are moments between characters like Rose and her friend Hal that are relationships that we get to see even more fleshed out. And I think that is a huge, important thing when it comes to adaptation. You take what someone did and you flesh it out even more. So this is a great show that I highly recommend. I don't know if any of my followers will watch this, but if you are contemplating on the next TV series to watch, go out and check out the Sandman on Netflix because it is awesome. So thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.